You are in the middle of a sentence. You are saying something that matters to you, something you have been thinking about, something you finally found the words for. And then someone else starts talking. Not after you finish, not during a pause, right in the middle of your thought. Their voice comes in over yours. Louder, faster, more certain. And just like that, your sentence disappears. You stop talking. You close your mouth. You let them have the floor. And no one notices. No one turns to you and says, "Wait, you were not finished." No one pauses to make room for what you were about to say. The conversation just moves on without you. And you sit there, holding the rest of your sentence in your chest like something undelivered. This is not the first time. It happens with friends. In the middle of telling a story, someone jumps in with their own. You smile. You let it go. You tell yourself it does not matter. It happens at work, in meetings where you wait for the right moment to speak, and the second you do, someone talks over you, and the room follows them instead. It happens at family dinners, where the loudest voice wins the table, and yours just gets lost in the noise. It happens in group conversations, where you open your mouth, and before you get 3 words out, someone redirects the topic entirely. It even happens in quiet, one-on-one moments, where you think you are safe, where you think this person, of all people, will let you finish. And then, they do not. And every time it happens, there is a small voice inside you that asks the same quiet question. Why do people always do this to me? Most people assume the answer is simple, that the other person is rude, impatient, disrespectful, and sometimes that is part of it. But the real reason people constantly interrupt you is not what you think. It is deeper, it is quieter, and it has been shaping your conversations longer than you realize. Stay here for a moment, because what you are about to hear might change the way you speak for the rest of your life. From the outside, it looks like a normal conversation. People talking, people laughing, people exchanging thoughts. Nothing unusual. But from the inside, it feels very different. Because when you are the one being interrupted, the experience is not social. It is personal. You feel ignored. You feel invisible. You feel like what you had to say was not important enough to be heard. And over time, that feeling does not just stay in the conversation. It follows you out of the room. It sits with you on the drive home. It whispers to you at night when you are replaying the moment in your head. You start to wonder if something is wrong with you. If maybe your voice is too quiet, your thoughts too slow, your presence too easy to overlook. You wonder if there is something about the way you speak that invites people to cut in. Something about your tone, your timing, the way you hold yourself when you talk. And the worst part is, you start to believe it. You start to think that maybe your words just are not interesting enough to hold someone's attention for a full sentence. But here is what no one tells you. Interruptions are rarely random. They are not just about one person being rude and another person being a victim. They follow a pattern, a subtle, invisible, deeply psychological pattern that most people are not even aware of. The person interrupting you is not always choosing to do it, and you are not always being passive by accident. Something is happening beneath the surface of every conversation. Something that decides who gets to speak, who gets to finish, and who quietly folds their sentence away before it ever lands. And once you see it, you will never hear a conversation the same way again. Because this is not about manners. This is about wiring. This is about patterns that were built long before you ever sat in that meeting room or stood in that circle of friends. And understanding those patterns does not make you weak. It makes you the only person in the room who actually knows what is going on. And that is a very different place to stand. Let us talk about what is actually happening when someone interrupts you. In every conversation, there is an invisible structure, a kind of unspoken hierarchy that determines who speaks, when they speak, and how much space they are allowed to take. Most people do not see it, but it is always there. It is built on signals. Tiny, subtle, almost invisible signals that your brain sends and receives without your conscious awareness. The first signal is tone. When you speak with a rising tone at the end of your sentences, your brain is signaling uncertainty. Not because you are uncertain, but because somewhere along the way, your voice learned to ask permission before making a statement. Other people hear that, not consciously, but their subconscious reads it as an opening, a gap, a space where they are allowed to step in. The second signal is pacing. When you pause too long between thoughts, when you slow down to find the right word, when you leave a breath of silence in the middle of your sentence, the people around you interpret that pause as a full stop. They do not hear a person thinking. They hear a person finishing. And so they begin. The third signal is volume. Not loudness, but vocal presence. The amount of space your voice takes in a room. Some people fill a room the moment they open their mouth. Others speak just loud enough to be heard, but not loud enough to hold attention. And then there is the deepest signal of all, confidence framing. This is not about how confident you feel inside. It is about how your body and voice present that confidence to others. Some people begin their sentences with certainty. They lean forward. Their first word lands firmly. Their rhythm is steady. Their voice does not waver. Others begin with softness, a slight hesitation, a qualifying word, and I think, or maybe, or sorry, but that arrives before the actual thought. And in the language of conversation, that softness does not read as politeness. It reads as a signal that your sentence can be interrupted, not by everyone, but by anyone whose subconscious is scanning for conversational openings. And in most social situations, that is almost everyone. This is how conversational hierarchy works. It is not written down. It is not spoken about, but it is happening in every conversation you have ever been in. There is always someone at the top of the hierarchy, the person whose voice holds the room, whose sentences are never cut short, whose pauses are treated as pauses, not as endings. And there is always someone at the bottom, the person who waits, who starts sentences that get swallowed, whose voice somehow never reaches the same weight as the others. And the difference between those two positions has almost nothing to do with intelligence, or value, or the quality of what they are saying. It has everything to do with the signals their body and voice are sending without their knowledge. None of this is your fault. These are not choices you made. These are patterns you absorbed. From years of watching how conversations worked around you. From years of learning which voices got space and which ones did not. Your nervous system did not choose to speak this way. It was trained to, and it learned its lessons well. And here is where the damage quietly builds. Because the world does not see the pattern, the world only sees the result. They see someone who does not speak up, someone who lets others take the lead, someone who seems fine with being talked over, and they make assumptions. They assume you do not have strong opinions. They assume you are agreeable, easygoing, low maintenance. They do not realize that you have a whole world of thoughts inside you that never makes it past your lips. At work, the person who interrupts you gets credit for the idea you were about to share. You watch it happen. You feel the heat rise in your chest. But you say nothing, because by the time you find your opening, the moment has already passed. In friendships, you become the listener, the one who holds space for everyone else, the one who nods and asks follow-up questions. But when it is your turn to share, the conversation somehow shifts before you get there. In groups, you become the quiet one, not because you have nothing to say, but because every time you try to say it, the window closes before your words can get through. And society does not help. Fast-paced conversations reward the loudest voice, not the most thoughtful one. Competitive workplaces promote the people who take up the most space, not the ones who listen the most carefully. Social dynamics are built for speed, for quick responses, For people who can grab the floor and hold it without hesitation. And if that is not your natural rhythm, you fall behind. Not because you are slower, but because the game was designed for a different kind of player. Nobody tells you this. Nobody sits you down and explains that the conversation has invisible rules. That some people were taught to take up space, and others were taught to leave it. You just feel the result. The tightness in your throat. The sentence that dies before it lands. The hollow feeling of watching someone else say what you were about to say and get the credit for it. So you develop coping mechanisms. You start speaking less, not because you want to, but because it feels safer than being cut off mid-sentence again. You start letting others finish their thoughts even when they have already interrupted yours. Because the discomfort of being talked over is worse than the discomfort of staying silent. You laugh off the interruptions. You wave your hand and say, "No, go ahead." You tell yourself it does not bother you. But it does. Every time it happens, something small inside you tightens. A tiny knot that says, "My voice does not hold the same weight as theirs." You start waiting too long before speaking, calculating the perfect moment. And by the time that moment arrives, someone else has already filled it. And the cycle continues, round and round, conversation after conversation. The same silence, the same swallowed words, the same invisible retreat. Not because you are not smart enough, not because your ideas are not good enough, but because the patterns that shape your voice were set a long time ago, and they are still running. So where did this begin? For most people, it started in childhood. Maybe you grew up in a home where the adults did most of the talking, where children were expected to listen, not to lead the conversation, where speaking up was met with correction, where your voice was gently, repeatedly redirected until you learned that it was easier to just wait. Wait for permission. Wait for a gap. Wait until you were absolutely sure that no one else wanted to speak first. Maybe you had a parent who interrupted you often, not out of cruelty, out of habit, out of their own patterns. And without knowing it, they taught your nervous system that your sentences were not guaranteed to be finished. Or maybe it was school. Maybe you were the child who raised your hand and waited, who followed the rules, who watched the louder kids shout their answers and get the attention while you sat with your hand in the air, patient and unseen. Maybe a teacher once cut you off mid-answer, or a classmate laughed before you could finish your thought, and your body recorded that, quietly, permanently. It did not need to happen many times. It just needed to happen at the right age, in the right moment, when your sense of self was still soft and forming. And your nervous system made a decision. It decided that speaking up was a risk, that taking space in a conversation came with a cost, that the safest way to exist in a social world was to make yourself just a little bit smaller, just quiet enough to stay safe, just invisible enough to avoid being a target. This was not weakness. This was intelligence. Your system assessed the environment. It noticed what happened when you took space. It noticed what happened when you did not. And it chose the path that kept you safest. That was a survival strategy. And at the time, it made perfect sense. It kept you safe. It kept you connected. It kept you from being the one who was singled out or shut down. The problem is, your nervous system does not update itself automatically. It does not look around the room and say, "Wait, we are not in that classroom anymore. We are not at that dinner table anymore. We are an adult now. We are allowed to take up space." It just keeps running the old program. The one that says wait. The one that says hesitate. The one that says let them go first. And so the pattern continues. Not because you are choosing it, but because your body never got the signal that it was safe to stop. It is still protecting the child who learned to go quiet. Even though that child has grown. Even though the room has changed. Even though the people around you now might actually want to hear what you have to say. Part 6. The reframe into identity, relief. So here is what you need to understand. Being interrupted does not mean your thoughts are less valuable. It does not mean you are less intelligent, less interesting, less worthy of being heard. It means you were trained to communicate in a way that leaves space for others. And in a world that rewards people who take space, that training puts you at a disadvantage. But it does not define you. Because here is the other side of this pattern that no one talks about. The people who get interrupted the most are often the ones who listen the best. They are the ones who pay attention to others before speaking, the ones who measure their words, the ones who think before they respond instead of reacting. They are the ones who notice the things that the loud voices in the room completely miss. That is not a flaw. That is a rare and undervalued form of communication. The world may not reward it, but the people closest to you feel it. They feel the safety of being with someone who listens before they speak, who holds space instead of grabbing it, who weighs their words instead of throwing them. You were never bad at conversation. You were just playing by a different set of rules. Rules that value depth over volume, precision over speed, listening over performing. And the first step toward changing how your conversations unfold is not learning to be louder. It is recognizing the pattern. It is seeing it clearly for the first time, understanding where it came from, understanding that it was never about your value. It was about your wiring. And wiring can be updated, not by forcing yourself to be someone you are not by shouting over others the way they shout over you, but by understanding that your nervous system built a pattern to protect you. And now that you can see it, you are no longer controlled by it. Awareness is the shift, not performance, not aggression, not pretending to be more confident than you feel. Just awareness, just seeing the pattern for what it is, and choosing, one conversation at a time, to stay in your sentence a little longer, to let your voice land before pulling it back, to trust that what you have to say is worth the space it takes. That is not arrogance. That is not selfishness. That is simply truth. You do not need to change who you are. You just need to see what has been happening and give yourself permission to take up the room your thoughts deserve. Not because someone told you to, but because you finally understand that your voice was never the problem. The pattern was. And patterns can be rewritten. So the next time someone interrupts you, instead of going quiet, instead of folding your sentence away, instead of telling yourself it does not matter, just notice. Notice what happens in your body. Notice the impulse to shrink. Notice the old reflex pulling your voice back before it has a chance to land. And ask yourself one quiet thing. What would happen if I just kept speaking? Not louder, not angrier, not forcefully, just steadily, calmly, as if your sentence deserves to be finished. Because it does. It always did. And you might find that the room was always waiting for you. It just did not know it yet. If something in this video made you pause, if you have ever swallowed a sentence because someone else started talking, leave a quiet comment. You do not have to explain the whole story. Just a word, just a moment, just a sign that this reached you. You do not have to be loud to be heard here. And if you want more like this, if you want to keep exploring the hidden psychology behind the things you feel but never say, subscribe. Stay close. There is so much more to uncover, and your voice is worth hearing.